Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. So good to have you here. If you're a new listener, welcome. If you've been with us before, welcome back. Great to have you as always. I am Dr. Margo Jacquot, your mental health business mentor. This podcast is really designed to help both the personal and professional side of growing your practice, growing your business. And if you are a practice owner and you're a single provider, you're just on your own, you know how stressful that is. If you have people working for you, you also know how stressful that is. So today, wonderfully, we are going to be talking about burnout, how to avoid burnout. And I have a lovely guest. Let me tell you all about Katie Babcock. Katie Babcock is a board approved licensed clinical professional counselor and a national certified counselor in Baltimore, Maryland. Katie is trained in EMDR and holds certifications as a certified clinical trauma professional and an ADHD certified clinical services provider, which, boy, is that needed these days. She is the founder of Counseling for Professionals, a private mental health practice specializing in supporting the mental wellness of adult professionals. I love that. As a professional and high achiever herself, yay you, kindred spirit, and someone who has experienced burnout multiple times, Katie is on a mission to support adult professionals, businesses, and organizations. Welcome, Katie Babcock. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So there's a lot in there, boy. High achiever, overachiever, boy, aren't we more prone to burnout because we don't know when to stop. So there's that for starters. We probably take on more than we should. Great. So let's just talk a little bit about burnout. And folks, I assume if you're a mental health professional, you understand burnout. But as we know, let's just have one conversation where we're all talking about the same thing. Katie, tell us about your definition of burnout and how we're going to talk about it here today.
Yeah. Thank you again so much for having me. Excited to talk about this. Feels so present right now. We're recording April 2025. So just for context, if anybody's listening, a few years down the road, feels really present to be talking about this right now. So, um, sort of how I define burnout, I almost want to start with what it is not. And what it is not a character or work ethic issue. It's not a compassion difficulty. It's not a motivation issue. It's not a performance or efficiency issue. What it what it really comes down to and sort of how I look at it through both the somatic perspective and a trauma-informed perspective, and I sort of wrote this down, so I made sure I got it right. So, looking at burnout as a physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual collapse of the body. And so, when we use the word somatic, fancy word for body, and when we're thinking from a trauma-informed lens, we're sort of looking through, like, how is the nervous system responding? And so, when we think of a collapse, I think of the freeze response, or freezing, somebody saying, like, "I'm burning out." I'm like, "Oh, you're starting to freeze," right? Or, "I'm burned out. I'm frozen." Like, the body, the nervous system is like, "No more. Stop. Abort mission." And I think high achievers and professionals actually can exist in the freezing space for a very long time. And then when we get to frozen, like true collapse, I often think that that comes from an event. It could be a medical event, it could be a physical injury, it could be an ailment that somebody's just not able to recover from. So, I really think burnout as a comprehensive physical experience, physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual.
Hmm. Yeah, it's pretty much everything. When somebody is burned out. So, right, there's a difference between I'm tired, I'm fatigued, I'm overworked, I need a vacation, and true burnout. I like that definition. That certainly fits. I've had a couple of those in my career as well. And wow, boy, it's one of those things. How do you know when you're in love? Well, you know when you're there. How do you know when you're burned out? I think you really know. It is so comprehensive and mind, body, spirit, everything. So, how did you come to this part of your work?
Well, probably it was a demand. I think I've experienced burnout in different ways over my life. Didn't recognize it as burnout for a long time, thought of it as an efficiency issue, thought of it as a attention difficulty issue, like if I could just get the schedule or if I could, not rest as much or maybe not be on media as much or if I could just rest a little bit more during the weekend. And ultimately, got to the place where even though we were taught like this is a very real probably the highest risk to our profession besides maybe suicidality or suicidal ideation from a client, started to be like, "Oh, is this that thing that they told us about to beware about?" Um, and part of sort of working with individuals with it now is one, because I have experienced it. I have had that lived experience where I had to really like it's a paradigm shift. Like you can't recovering from burnout is not getting you back to where you were so you can do it all over again. It is a comprehensive shift in how we're doing our work. And so, part of working with high achieving professionals is in a lot of ways, the professional identity and the high achievement has been such a source of escape and recognition and identity and confidence. And then to start not being able to do it in the same manner can be a real, um, scary place and, uncomfortable place, and I think I've been there, a few times in my career and questioning myself, questioning, "Can I keep going?" And so that sort of leads me to wanna help people with this because, um, the things that helped me in my own very, uh sometimes chaotic upbringing, which was high achievement, leaning into school, sports, and just go, sort of being in that fight and flight mentality. At a certain point, we only there's a ceiling for that. So that really has brought me to the space of recognizing my own body, which I will name as a daily, multiple times per day checking in, like what does my body need, and I'm very likely to put it off, and now I know, I work on it every day to not put myself on the back burner.
Ooh. So there's a couple things you said in there. Well, there's several things you said in there, Katie. One is that we can't assume that when we're trying to recover from burnout, and again, I think it's pretty rampant in our field. It can be. Um, there is a muscle, an emotional muscle that I think it's developed over time. So I tend to see it a little more in early career, maybe early mid-career therapists in particular, later career therapists. We've talked about this. I talked about this with some colleagues. I'm like, yeah, I've been there, done that. And we figure out some skill set. But to your point, you're not going to go back to where you started from. What that to me is critical. Once you've had this experience, something has to shift. You can't just get better, go on vacation, come back and try to do it all over again, or you're going to end up right there again. And the second thing is you take care of this daily. You check in with yourself daily. This isn't a, oh, I think my hair is on fire now, so maybe I should start running, both of which are bad, right? So it's how do we prevent your hair from being on fire and don't run? So so those feel like really critical pieces to me. And we're going to talk a bit about how does one handle burnout. But you've mentioned, Katie, that in previous conversation that it feels like more people are experiencing burnout since the pandemic. Can you speak a little bit to that? Because I think a lot of us are feeling like, okay, phew, that's done. That stunk. Let's keep moving. Let's step on the gas pedal again. But what have you noticed since the pandemic?
Woo, it's a big one. We could I think you and I could talk about this for 4 hours. Yeah, so well, maybe we can start at the pandemic and move forward. Somebody wise just recently shared with me, like, none of us therapists, clinicians, business owners ever had a book that taught us how to thrive and survive, let alone thrive during a global pandemic. So, when I'll speak from a therapeutic standpoint, when we go to graduate school and we're in our clinical experiences and training and internships, often there is a separation, right? So we might have the shared lived experience that one of our clients has, but we're not often going through the same exact thing. And so during the pandemic, when we have unprecedented times, we as a therapist and clinician are experiencing the same level or similar levels of distress and uncertainty and mortality triggers. And again, there wasn't a psychology 101 in your master's degree class about how to do that. And so a lot of it was making it up, not making it up, but like just going through it at the same time and doing the very best that we could. Well, going through brand new things from a nervous system perspective can often be identified as unsafe. Like, we don't have the consistency, we don't have the reliability to be like, "Is this the way we do it?" It's like, "We don't know, we've never done it." So, that took a long time, and how that sort of I would say is playing out right now is we are also in another unprecedented time. And while there are some similarities to the pandemic, there are vast differences too. In the pandemic, common enemy, COVID, right? The coronavirus, right? During these times, I would say with the new administration and changes happening day after day after day, there's not a semblance of reliability or consistency. And that's a one information overload. And then the content of the information that is changing on a daily basis is profoundly impactful to our lives and to our clients' lives. And part of, I would say, in this space, in the here and now, is okay, what does the world look like in 6 months? What does clients' access to care look like? What does our own business, in terms of reliability and being able to predict what happens to our business, what does that look like? And I think we don't have a framework for what's happening right now. And so whether it's a business owner, whether it's an individual therapist, or whether it's a client, I think that just the natural response to distressful situations is feeling overwhelmed. So I think there are normative responses happening right now, for most people. And I purposefully want to name that this is not a um, uh, the normal response to overwhelm is feeling out of balance, feeling scared, feeling uncertainty. So I think there's a lot of things at play here, related to the pandemic, related to the times right now, and even business owners related to our different systems that are in place that are also very unpredictable right now.
Boy, that's very well said, Katie, right? So we just had the pandemic. The From a business perspective, it was kind of a boom during the pandemic. So there was this simultaneous almost more business than many of us could handle, and trying to keep up with our own fear, our own concerns, helping our clients do the same. And then the pandemic sort of wraps itself up, and of course COVID is still here, and so on. But however, the business has changed. And now people who maybe started a practice during the pandemic are saying, well, what's happening? How come I'm not getting as many clients as I was before? What I don't understand. Some people are still very full and other people not as much. So the landscape of the business has changed. Oh, and now you have to go out and you have to seek those clients. You have to invite those clients, find those clients. And so that's a shift in business time and allocation of resources. And oh yes, now we have a political administration that regardless of your political affiliation, I don't think anyone can deny that there are massive changes happening daily. So most of us are feeling a bit unsettled about what's to come. So that makes great, great sense. So, can you speak? You mentioned trauma, Katie. Can you speak to how trauma, especially early trauma and things that happen as we're growing up, how all of that, you mentioned your own childhood and aspirations and I don't for me, I'll use the word perfectionism as a life skill, right? As a strategy to try to get through my life. But how do you see this correlation between trauma and burnout? Because many therapists, many humans, as we know, we have our own trauma histories. So we had the pandemic as trauma. Some folks are experiencing the current administration as trauma. Lots of that stuff is happening. So can you just tie those pieces together for us, please? And you mentioned it a little bit in nervous system, so I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I tend to think of burnout and trauma as like in the same family. So can somebody experience trauma without feeling burnout in their life throughout the entirety of their life? Sure. Um, and I also think if somebody is experiencing burnout, can we as clinicians or can we as individuals look back and sort of be like, have I experienced trauma? And I think the likelihood's pretty high. They're not mutually exclusive, but I think if as a therapist, you've been working with somebody even a minimum of 3 sessions, you can probably look back on some adverse childhood experiences. Now, how are these things related? Well, people growing up people growing up in survival-based upbringings often have to make conscious and unconscious decisions to not pay attention to themselves, to deny themselves, to avoid or minimize themselves. And, well, why do they do that? Well, because whatever is most unsafe demands attention. So my preferences, my desires, if I wanna try out for the soccer team, if I want to go over to a friend's house, that's gonna get really pushed on the back burner if it is unsafe to even have those desires. And so the avoidance or the minimization of self, the not paying attention to self, incredibly adaptive coping strategies, like life-saving coping strategies, right? Like, if we were to look at, like, if we use imagery in our tool belt, like, minimize self is, like, a really good life-saving coping strategy in an unsafe situation. It's like, whatever gets us to safety, my preferences don't matter, my desires don't matter, my likes, my dislikes don't matter, just let's get to safety. So our from a nervous system perspective, our survival part of ourself, which is just survive. Survival's not about preferences, it's just stay alive one more day. So, how does that sort of segue into burnout? Well, so when a person grows up in a system where they've not been allowed to have a self, they've not been allowed to have likes or preferences or basic needs met, they don't have a framework of how to take care of themselves. They have a framework for how to survive, but how to take care of themselves is a different dynamic altogether. How to go to sleep, how to feed self, how to have boundaries in relationships, even what is even a boundary. So often in these experiences, boundaries are not there. So as we look to burnout and look at burnout, we have to understand that it is very likely that the history of not being able to have a self is continuing to play out in adulthood. It just looks different and feels different than maybe childhood, but it's really the same threads. Like, how am I minimizing myself? How am I neglecting myself? How am I saying that thing doesn't matter? Um, and also, when we recognize like those things are at play, even in adulthood, we honor them. So, like, okay, we honor that, you can stay up all night because, your child needs the cookies for, their bake sale tomorrow. Great. You're a wonderful mother. You're a wonderful father. Fantastic. And how are you going to suffer as an individual for doing that or recreating that? How is the family going to suffer? How is your work going to suffer? And so it's an honoring of, but we do have to look at, okay, now how do we shift this? Because we really need to put ourselves first.
Ooh, that's beautiful, Katie. That's probably the best description I've ever heard about that correlation between the two. And as therapists who are probably folks listening to this podcast, we get that. We've been with people who don't necessarily have that sense of self. And guess what, folks? It might be us as well. Because not only do we now have our home life, our family potentially, we've got our clients, we now have a bunch of clinicians that we're taking care of. I mean, just adding another layer of complexity. That's beautiful. All right. So, Katie, how do you support someone who is only now starting to realize they've never known how to care for themselves, which I can think of a lot of people for whom that is the truth.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I love this question, and I can also, identify y a few years ago, maybe more than a few years ago, but that was me. Like, I just thought that it was a capacity issue, it was an attention difficulty, but then again, starting to realize, like, no, I think that this is that thing that they taught me about. So, I think recognizing, like, particularly if it's going on for a long period of time, like, "Oh, this might be burnout," and then name right? So the recognition and naming, I think we get to naming through recognition. Um, and as we recognize and as we name, I think identification is very important, and giving yourself permission to let go of guilt and judgment of self. Like, there is something much larger happening here, either individually, professionally, collectively, systemically, or environmentally, that is creating difficulty for you. So, this is not a personal failure, but something much larger happening. So, that grace, that forgiveness, and then I wrote down on my paper, "Understand it, like, really."
Take it
And,
seriously. Yes.
yes, yes,
Mhm.
exclamation point,
Mhm.
because this isn't another to-do list that you have to work on in addition to your other to-do list. This is, like, something is occurring in my life and this is unsustainable. And so how do I truly understand that? Because as I truly understand that I can start to be curious and ask bigger questions of how can I do it differently? And to be clear, recognizing, naming, and understanding can push us into a gradual paradigm shift, but the naming of it does not change it. So it's like when people are like, "I'm so stressed, but who is it?" It's like, well,
Right?
that doesn't help your stress, 1. And 2, other people's stress is other people's stress. Like, we try and sort of make light of it, we joke about it, we belittle it, but naming it doesn't change it. We have to do something with it. We have to see that as information to take and go somewhere with. And so I think that that's really important, as we are trying to recover from burnout.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. That point of, folks, this is an action item. This isn't to put it on your to-do list. This is about something really important has to change. And I think about the times and again, I've had 2 pretty significant episodes of burnout and realized the first time I realized I had too many jobs and I had to give up one, which was hard because I needed the income. So these are not easy decisions to make, but they must happen, or our brain, our body, and our nervous system are going to continue to do what they've been doing. So, from a mental health perspective, Katie, how does this show up, and what symptoms should we be watching for?
Yeah, yeah. I love this question, and I wanna name that it's really variable and it's pretty subjective. So per person, it can be irritability, it can be anxiousness, it could be anxiousness towards things that you don't typically feel anxious about. It could be irritability towards tasks or people that you don't normally feel irritable towards. Um, I think it could be an inability to relax. So feeling like you have to always be on, feeling like you can never walk away, whether that's from work, whether that's from a family dynamic or a role or responsibility. I think criticism is going to pop up, or criticism of others. So like being like so angry with coworkers or so frustrated with your clients because they're just not doing the thing. And I think we have to look at that really like, what is there something going on? Because normally I look down the barrel of my Wednesday and I'm really excited about it. And today I'm like so frustrated about it. Um, I think feeling trapped I think can be a pretty clear um like there's something going on in somebody's world and they feel like in a corner or trapped. And then I think there are some very clear neurological difficulties that people start to experience. That could be brain fog, difficulties with concentration, memory difficulties. Like I might hear that as like, I'm just like not as sharp right now, or like I just, I can't remember what we did last week. And then some of the physical difficulties or somatic difficulties, aches, pains, injury, inability to heal from things that you normally would heal from. One of the foundational things that I look for with clients and myself is disruptions with sleep. Do I have difficulty falling asleep? Do I have difficulty staying asleep? Um, Body activation, am I putting off moving my body? Am I, staying at the computer when I really should get up and go to the bathroom? Am I working through my lunch? I'm looking at disruptions with nutrition. If somebody's saying like, I just don't really have an appetite or I'm eating a lot, these things can go in either direction. And then also social engagement and fun. I think when we're burnt out, that is a pretty quick thing to fall off for some people, not all people, but because it's devalued at times. Being creative, our social world can sort of be like, ah, that's just more work. And, I think if somebody is, regularly canceling on family and friends or even periodically, like, "Hey, what's going on here? You like to have fun, you love being around your family." So, I think there's a lot of ways that this can show up from that mental health perspective.
Hmm. Well, and I like the way you're looking at the brain, the body, and the nervous system and how they're all functioning together. And we need to be looking at each of those and paying attention. I can imagine somebody listening to this would say, well, that sounds a little bit like depression, or, um, well, I feel that way all the time. That's just normal for me. Well, okay, but let's pause for a moment, is your advice, and be curious about it. It may be that you're just tired. It may be that you're a bit depressed. It may be that the world climate is overwhelming for you, or it may be that you are in a process, even the frog in the pot that has just heated up and is boiling and doesn't even realize it. Sorry, folks, I don't like to do that to frogs, but you know. So, so this is what we're talking about. This is what burnout looks like: brain, body, nervous system, spirituality, the whole self, if the self is available. How can someone start to rebuild their brain, body, nervous system, their mental health after hitting burnout? And what does that recovery process look like?
Yeah, yeah, 'cause, naming it, as we said, doesn't quite take it away or solve for it. So how do we get out of this? Well, um, part of understanding this is understanding we need help. And the way we're doing it is no longer sustainable. And I think when we need help and we're overwhelmed, I'm sort of like, let's see what we have in our back pocket already. Are we working with a therapist or did we fall off our own therapy? It's like, okay, well, that's a resource that a lot of people might have. Um, if you're working with an organization or a private practice, is there any type of EAP program? So, is this woven into the fabric of the organization where there is some support for you? I think the other thing, too, again, related to being overwhelmed, is can you go to your leadership or supervisor, if it is a safe environment, and ask for help? Say, "Here's what's happening." You've named it to yourself and name it to your supervisor. I think the other thing too in that is giving yourself permission to not have the solution for your own difficulty. So so somebody not experiencing burnout might be able to help you, particularly in an employment environment, because they're not the ones experiencing it. They're like, "Okay, how can we reconfigure things?" Um, I think talking with your your crew, I call them, like your people,
Mhm.
and your people doesn't have to be 7 people. It can be 2 people. It can be just like people who you can be yourself with. They can give you trusted, sound support. And the same thing, they might, because they love you, because they care about you, it's likely, I would suspect that they've seen this going on for some time, maybe even wanted to say like, "Hey, Katie, you're going real fast," right? "Hey, Margo, you're going real fast."
Mhm.
Um, and recognizing that these are people that love you, that they care about you, and so they might also have some solutions or might be able to see out of a scope that you can't because 'cause you're so overwhelmed.
Mm.
Um, and I think those are some spaces, and then in those conversations, in those recognitions, we get to ask, like, what can change? Not what are you doing wrong? How do you become more efficient or more productive? It's like, what can change here?
Mhm.
And being very curious, like, yeah, what can change? Because this is no longer sustainable. So I like leaning in with that openness, the what can change, as opposed to like, what do you have to cut out? Where are your values? And why are you valuing this over that? It's like, well, it's all valuable. That's why we're doing it. It's all helping us in some way. So, like, let's look at where we can pivot a little bit. Maybe not pivot, but where can we try new things?
Mhm. And it might be, Katie, that it sounds like people are gonna have to make changes that are uncomfortable, that they don't want to necessarily make. But your point is we have to listen to what our brain, body, and nervous system and spirit are telling us and pay attention, just like we would ask a client to do, right? I mean, we kind of have to take our own good advice. So, Katie, we talked quite a bit about what this might look like and how we might recognize it. Let's go back and just touch a little more, if you don't mind, please, on what that recovery process can look like. And of course, there's variability, but what can it look like?
Yeah, yeah. So this is really important, particularly for those high achievers. They're sort of like are already uncomfortable because they've reached capacity and they want to keep going. So just to manage expectations, the recovery process takes time. And I don't have a specific time frame, but it's not 2 sessions with a therapist.
No.
Because when we're looking from the lens of trauma healing and trauma healing and trauma recovery is relational, and what I mean by that is we're working with somebody and we're working with ourselves to form a new relationship, and so that takes time, and so I just wanna name to help support people going through this is that the recovery process tends to take time and we practice slowly. We have a conversation with one of our leadership team members. We talk with our partner about, hey, I can't sustain this responsibility anymore. How can we move to a new shift? And so I think that tenderness, that gentleness towards self, and then towards this process, if we think about it like a doctor's orders post surgery, it's like, this is gonna take a while. This is not get back up on your feet. We need to have that hip moving again.
Right.
This is yeah, it's like we have to be really mindful here because there's a lot of things happening. So I just wanted to name that um, this is not a let's hurry up and get out of this. This is a whole new way of being that, quite frankly, we need time to figure out what works and what doesn't work.
right. And to your point, we're not, humans don't change quickly. If we did, therapy wouldn't be an ongoing process. We'd meet for 5 sessions and be done. So, right, have the same compassion for ourselves. So, Katie, what would you say to someone who's listening right now, who's a practice owner of some kind, who's a therapist of some kind? They are overwhelmed by all of these variables that we mentioned. They're noticing these symptoms and they just kind of feel like they're hanging on by a thread. What would you say to them?
I'd say thanks to listening for this episode to help yourself.
Yes, right?
I mean, that like, here you are listening to an episode about burnout to support yourself. You're recognizing, you're naming something, and, like, you're already starting the healing process. Um, I think this time is hard right now. I wanna be clear, like, this is not a disproportionate response to what's happening around you. This is a normative response to what is happening around you. And so, yes, we are talking about some coping skills today. Yes, we are talking about some practicalities, but I also want us to name your perhaps dysregulation is a direct reflection of what is happening in the world around you. And so when perhaps systemic things are happening in the world around us is feeling chaotic, maybe we lean in with gentleness, maybe we adjust our expectations, maybe we shift our business goals for the next quarter or the next 2 quarters or for the next year because how you started 2025 and 4 months in are drastically different. And so that tenderness, that gentleness towards self is like there's no ceiling on that. There's no you're being too gentle on self, you're being too tender. It's like, hold on, the world sort of changed again. Let's maybe give ourselves permission to say, well, the world changed, therefore, I don't know all the answers right now. I don't know what the solution is for my business. And that is just not knowing is overwhelming, let alone finding out the solution. So I think I just wanna, give give anyone listening a hug right now if you're feeling overwhelmed and burnt out. We can lean into the gentle, sweet things like asking a partner for a hug, picking up your cat, um, going outside and getting a little sunshine, feeling some grass. These are just some small supports, and when we're in tumultuous times, I think we do have to just drop into the basics at times. It's like without the basics, everything's off anyway. So when we're going through tumultuous times, looking at that sleep, looking at are you able to cook yourself a meal? And if you can't, that's totally okay. But are you able to put nutrition in your body? So I think that it's going to take time if you're experiencing burnout right now and um, doing some of the things that you know how to do or reaching out to the supports that you do know how to reach out to, because you have now more resources as an adult than you did as a vulnerable child.
Hmm, lovely. That's lovely. And a lot of what you just mentioned, Katie, sounds like wonderful ways if we're not in burnout to avoid it because it can hit us and we just don't even necessarily see it coming. So getting out, getting some sunshine, picking up your cat, petting your dog, whatever it is you need to do, getting a hug from your partner, all of those things can help us, support us to prevent getting to this state, which is what we're looking for anyway. So, Katie Babcock, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. You are lovely. We will have in our show notes how to get a hold of you. We'll have your contact information. But if somebody did want to connect with you, what is the best way to do so? Email, LinkedIn, what's a good way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, I am on LinkedIn under Katie Babcock. I also have my website, counselingforprofessionals.com. Feel free to email me directly. I'm, open to that as well, or direct message me via LinkedIn. My email is K Babcock. The spelling will be in the show notes. K Babcock at counselingforprofessionals.com. I would definitely love to hear from anybody.
Wonderful. You're delightful, folks. Please reach out to Katie if you have any questions. If you have any questions for me, that'll also be in the show notes, but it's Margo Jacquot at thejunipercenter.com. Always wonderful to have you with us. Katie, wonderful to have you today. Listeners, great to have you. Please join us again next time. Be well.
Thank you so much.